Hello, welcome back to How to Learn a Language. Today we're talking about language input versus output, and in particular, why speaking doesn't catch up automatically. Even if you're listening loads, you're reading loads, you're doing all the right things, but your speaking still feels held back. Now, this matters because so many learners feel like they should be improving. They feel like they know lots of stuff, they're putting in the effort, they're putting in the time, but they still feel like they can't speak. So I see this all the time, that feeling of, I understand everything, but I can't speak. And often, like I say, the people that say this to me are doing the work, they're showing up, they're putting in the effort, and just then left feeling like, this is frustrating. I'm doing loads. Why isn't it working? Now, before we get into it, just a reminder, be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast because if this resonates with you, I have got quite a useful series coming up over the next few weeks, both here on the podcast and on YouTube. So I highly recommend that you subscribe now so you don't miss an episode. And also, if you join my email list, lindsaydoeslanguages.com/email me, you'll get extra insights there as well. All right, then, let's get started. Now, first of all, I do just want to clarify because when we say language input versus output, this isn't a competition. there isn't going to be a winner in this versus. Like so often, these things are pitted against each other as either you need lots of input and you believe that that is the way, that is the key, and it's the comprehensible input idea, that's going to help you, and boom, you'll get fluent. Versus it's output, it's comprehensible output, it's speak, 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 do all the speaking. And actually, really, the reality is somewhere in the middle. So, being able to understand a language and being able to speak it is really what you want, because even though you might say, I just want to speak this language, that is what's most important to me. Half of being able to speak a language well is being able to understand it, because you're not going to be just giving a monologue every time. You're going to be talking with people, right? Rather than at people. So you need to also listen and understand what they're saying to you so that you can respond, so that you can say the right things in the moment, right? So both of these things matter. And in terms of then learning, that's where, again, we get this big versus of, it's the comprehensible input, or you're a fan of speak, speak, speak. And it just does not have to be that, because when we do opt for one or the other, we tend to find that something is lacking, right? Because understanding a language and actually being able to use it, they're related, but they're not the same skill. If we just go for input, then, you're listening all the time, you're reading, you're getting all the exposure. What happens is you can recognize words, you can follow a storyline, you can even understand complex ideas. But when it comes to speaking is asking you to do different things. You're being asked to retrieve language, to organize it, and to really commit to what you're saying, often under a bit of pressure, because there's this time constraint of someone stood in front of you and they're not going to wait forever for you to say what you want to say. If you get input alone, you're not training for that. You're not training to be good at speaking. Now, I think what's really useful here is the idea of Merrill Swain's comprehensible output hypothesis. So Swain showed that learners often only notice what they don't know when they try to produce the language, right? The input doesn't reveal those gaps to you in the same way. It's only when you're trying to practice and to say things or to write things down that you actually realize, I don't know how to say that. I don't know what tense that should be, or I don't know the word for that. You don't realize that stuff in the same way if you're only getting input. And if you've been led to believe that input alone is going to automatically turn into output, then what happens when speaking doesn't catch up automatically, when your speaking is lagging behind where you think it should be based on how much you can understand, you assume that something's wrong with you. When actually, all that's been happening is you've been training a different skill. Nothing is wrong with you. It's just the skill isn't there yet because you've not been training for it. You've not been practicing that. And so, of course, you're not good at speaking. So instead of asking yourself, am I getting enough input? Am I doing this right? Try asking, where am I practicing retrieval? Where do I actually make language myself, do I have enough speaking and writing practice and output in my regular language learning routine? Because even just, micro habit, little tiny amounts of output can really change the way that you feel about this and how confident you feel when it comes to speaking and writing. Something I do a lot right now is I have the notes app on my phone, and each language has its own notes page. And I just, at the top of each of those pages, write down the date and then write something. Or sometimes I'll hit record to make a voice note as well. And it's just getting that regular practice in and having a way to track it. I don't have to be checking back to it all the time, but I just love that little micro habit of even just one sentence at a time of output. It feels really, really good. And one of the reasons that it feels so good is that output does something that input can't. When you speak, when you write, something very different is happening cognitively, right? There's this process that happens when we speak. And the similar thing with writing. The big difference is pace and speed, right? But essentially, we have this idea of these 3 stages where we're figuring out, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? And then we actually say it. So we think, often we think it's just the last bit, that it's just the saying it, right? And we get frustrated, like, why can't I just say the things? Because we don't notice the process in our own language. When we're speaking English, if that's your native language, you don't notice, oh yeah, I'm thinking of what to say, I'm thinking of how to say it, and now I'm saying it, because you've been doing this your whole life. But when we learn in another language and we want to actually speak it, we have to think about all 3 stages. And there's a lot that we're being forced to do there. We're being forced to choose one structure, one way to say this, perhaps instead of multiple ways that you might know or think could work or possibly would make sense. You're having to realize also, like, oh, which words don't I know? Which words can't I quite access yet? And you're also being forced to notice your hesitation, your uncertainty, any avoidance that's going on for yourself. And that is really powerful, and it can really make you realize just how much more practice you want to get, typically. And coming back to Swain with the idea of the comprehensible output hypothesis, Swain argued that output really pushes learners to process language more deeply. And so when you're getting that output of stuff that feels comprehensible, that's not like way beyond your league, you're really being pushed to process things on a much deeper level than just often quite passive input. And I know, right? It feels really comfortable to not speak, to think, yeah, I understand. I'll be able to do it when I need to. I've definitely fallen into this myself. The idea of like, okay, I get it. Moving on. What's next? And it's really easy to ignore this bit. But we really, really shouldn't, because it doesn't have to be high stakes all the time. Because that's the other thing with output, is it feels like you need to have a lesson booked and it has to be done in advance and someone else is relying on you to be there and to show up. And there's all these factors at play, but we overcomplicate it. We can have really low stakes output opportunities that will help your speaking to catch up. Like I mentioned, my short voice notes, my little 1 sentence a day on my notes app, having a chance to just summarize something out loud or read aloud what you're reading in the language. Just these little tiny things. It's not about performance. It's just giving your brain these multiple opportunities to get used to speaking and writing the language and producing it for yourself. I mentioned the idea of low stakes output. That's part of the difficult thing here, is that often speaking and output feels really high stakes because it's really emotionally demanding. You're managing time pressure, self-monitoring, fear of mistakes, fear of judgment, all of this. And that can often slow down the access to the language that you do know, because it just gets in the way. You just really get in your head. And when you're in the moment and you feel like, poof, I've frozen, I can't remember anything, it's because there's so much going on. It's a very emotionally demanding task. It's not just about the language. There's been a lot of research on affective factors in second language acquisition that has long shown that anxiety really interferes with retrieval and performance. Even if your competence overall in the language is really strong, if you're feeling quite anxious and all of these things are just floating around and blocking the language essentially, then often speaking is going to lag behind. This really matters because I'm not just telling you this as nice to know. I think this is really important to know, because if you expect speaking to catch up automatically, you're just going to interpret that lag, that gap between what you understand and what you can say, as a regression and as failure. And it really is not that. So I want to make sure that you feel good about this, that you understand this, and that you can recognize, what can be done to help. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated, big plans to change how you do everything. Just assuming that the understanding will come first, and accepting that there may be a lag, and then figuring out how can you shorten that lag? How can you make speaking catch up a little bit more with those low stakes output opportunities? All of this stuff is really, really helpful. If this resonates, I just really want to make it clear that you don't need more input. You just might need a different balance. And I'm running a brand new free event soon, which is all about stepping back and just realigning how you're learning. If you're feeling stuck and feeling like things are out of pace, whether it's speaking, whether it's input, output, then this is going to be really useful. I'll be sharing more in the coming weeks. In the meantime, this podcast right here is the first episode in a little series I'll be sharing here on the podcast and over on YouTube, helping you to prepare for a language reset and for clarity for better language learning. So be sure to subscribe here and over on YouTube to catch every episode. And if you're not already on my email list, I recommend that too, for those extra insights on the topics that won't be shared elsewhere. So it's lindsaydoeslanguages.com/email me for that. And I will speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye.